Vampires in Iraq, part 2. So yesterday we ran out of sunlight, and I had to put this down for a minute, which is good because we are getting a little bit emotional. And so emotions are good. My theory is that they're compact thoughts. So you don't want to really act in an emotional state unless it's fight or flight, and you have to use that. They're like steroids. They're like that cortisol, that stuff that's released when you have to act quickly for your own self-interest. That's why I think you have emotions, that instinctual response. But you want to slow down too, especially when you're dealing with war. You're dealing with very complex problems where there's no maybe black or white, because there are existential threats you have to protect against. So the emotions are going to come up, and this is from me just observing, being in the military but not serving in a combat zone, but having friends and family who have very close friends and family who are affected physically and psychologically. So it's going to get emotional, but that's okay. We just want to make sure that we're adding as much context as we can, and when we pausing is never bad. Instead of coffee today, we have In-N-Out shake, which might help with the heavy reading because we have about 40 pages to go. So a little bit of sugar might help. On the bottom of In-N-Out, there's a Bible verse, Proverbs 3:5. What does that mean? Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. That's pretty much what I expect from spirituality, is something to submit yourself to check your ego. Again, I think I've outgrown the Christian tribe, but I respect it. I respect any faith that allows you to submit your ego to it, so that way we're not limited by the bias of one person's view. I think that's the evolution of spirituality and faith in humanity, was to expand. It's hard to solve a problem with the same mind that created it. That's where religion comes in. You have a faith that you can submit to, and now we can check that ego. Correct the default mode network that they're discovering exists in your brain. That is your default way of looking at the world. Now, psychedelics also do this, which is why people maybe experience spiritual states in psychedelics. It's all related. But yeah, so that's a cool Bible verse, In-N-Out. Let us try to be humble while we analyze these complex problems. Yesterday, one of the pages I read, strategy, 4 questions. Because I'm just going back real quick because I really like this note. This is why I like military history. This is why I like the military. This is why I like wrestling. This is why I like playing chess. I love strategy. I love competition. I love war games, any competing games. Some people just are more competitive than others maybe, and I like to compete. So strategy, 4 questions. Who are you? What are you trying to do? How will you do it? What resources and means will you employ doing it? Who are you? What is the objective? How to complete the objective? And what are our resources? So who are you? What do we want? So who are we? What do we want? How are we going to get there? And using what means. So that's, if you just repeat something, simplified until it becomes common sense. Who are we? We're America. What do we want? Do we want revenge for 9/11? Do we want to create a world in which there are less terrorists? We want more global security, obviously. I think that's unifying. Anyone who would support war in our country doesn't want to support a war that would endanger our country. Just the opposite. We go to war in order to defend our country. So who are we? We're Americans. What do we want? A more secure America. How are we going to do that? Apparently, in 2003, Bush said we were going to do that by invading Iraq. And what are our resources? we are going to get a coalition of a handful of other nations. Most of the world was against us, and use our military in this Rumsfeldian new way of heavy reliance on special operations, technology, lean supply chains, which Walmart and corporations started revolutionizing in the 90s. So Rumsfeld was the revolutionary administrator, and that's what the resources he was going to employ. And those types of cutting corners, I think that's the pattern that we're going to see. In executing this war, they tried to do it like a Walmart supply chain, and they left a lot of soldiers hanging. Also, they lied about who we were. They lied about what we were trying to do. Definitely lied about how we were going to do it, and that's that mission creep. They keep changing the objectives on the commanders on the ground. And they were overconfident in the resources they could employ to get that done, which is why we have the mess we have now. Or if you're more cynical, you think that it was purposeful and this was to stagnate us in the area so that way we can keep a lot of troops there and we can keep pushing our geostrategic objective. That seems cynical, but Zerbabisky, whatever his name in the book, The Grand Chessboard, said pretty much the same thing. And that's something that I go back to, is in order for this moneyed elite class, this social class of people who seem to stay in power, to keep their same people in power, and that's what we'll see if we analyze the current political structure, this is people from the same class as generations before. It seems like if not the same people or the same families, definitely the people who go to those country clubs, who sit on those boards, stay in power. And so this social class, as defined by sociologists, seem to stay in power. And in order for them to coordinate, their stuff is pretty open. They talk about bohemian groves and secret cabals of people. That's too complicated. No, their stuff is in the Project for a New American Century and these think tanks where it's right out in the open. So the Grand Chessboard is a book that was published right out there in the open. And their ideology is that American empire, like the Roman Empire, is going to be kept by this imperial pattern. You have the empire, you have your vassals, you have your tributaries, and you have your barbarians. And I guess I would call myself an unaligned barbarian in that sense, which is what the Third World tried to do. The people who coined the term the Third World before it became pejorative for shithole countries was actually trying to be the third way, which relates back to that poem. So you see, honest intellectual inquiry, whether in politics or in arts, doesn't like being confined to false dichotomies. And when you have in the Cold War, you had the United States and you had Russia, and they were saying authoritarian capitalism or authoritarian communism. There were a lot of developing nations who said, we just want to be able to write our own destiny, control our own narrative. And so they called themselves the Third World. It was supposed to be the third way, where they weren't going to be captured by these authoritarian dogmas. And then that was, like most countercultures, what we see when you come out with an alternative to the narrative, the dominant culture seems to capture that. And so now it's been captured and used as, Third World is a shithole. So that's how a lot of counterculture, once it's co-opted, and then it's turned into an insult. And so hippie was used as a derogatory term. Occupiers happened quickly. When we were occupying Wall Street, they quickly started calling us occupiers, and and whenever you can slander a large group of people, they don't have to listen to them anymore because they're just idiots, assholes, violent, blah, blah, blah. That's enough ranting. Time to get to the notes. Destroyed the few unifying national institutions between Sunni and Shiite, threw more than 500,000 people out of work, undercut police ability, reaction of Iraqis, all of us will become suicide bombers. I can't be your friend anymore. The only thing left for me is to blow myself up in the face of tyrants. These aren't my notes. These are the notes of Thomas Frisk. I'm just pulling out what I think is interesting for my own education and for the story that at the time I was thinking about writing. Vampires in Iraq. June 18th, 2000. Iraqi soldiers gather outside the Green Zone. We're very well-trained soldiers. We will take up arms. We will start ambushing, bombings, even suicide bombings. We will not let Americans rule us in such a humiliating way. I don't know if that's June 18th, 2000. Maybe I meant 2003, because we weren't in Iraq in 2000. But these quotes, you should be able to find them in the book. We should be able to find all the sources of this stuff. God bless the internet. Bremer began moving Iraq towards free market economy, shutting down unprofitable state-run industries factories managed by middle class. Isn't that funny? You don't even have functioning civil society, and yet they're pushing their ideology. This is a free market. That's just insane. You can't. How can you preach anything about economics if you don't have Social Security? Literal, not Social Security like our program here, like the security of social civic society. Bremer began moving Iraq towards blah blah blah. De-Baathification, dissolution of military, economic upheaval, undercut social stability, took people out of economic and political life of the country. Chalabi's organization was paid tens of millions of dollars, proposed the de-Baathification, gave false intel before the war, talked with Iranians about U.S. military positions, all stuff that's on the record. Two classical ingredients of guerrilla war: sympathy of population and external support. So we're sowing the seeds for the chaos that's to come. Ba'athist supporters went to Syria, where they collected aid to funnel into Iraq. Definition of guerrilla war: military and paramilitary operations conducted in enemy-held or hostile territory by irregular ground indigenous forces. Bring 'em on, Islamic Jihad Army a year later. Have you another challenge? So bring 'em on, I think, was something that we said in a cocky tone. And then the Islamic Jihad Army a year later was like, what else you got? The Peter Principle. In a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. This is probably one of the first times I heard that, so I wrote it down. Military commander rule: praise in public, chastise in private. This is probably stuff that we're not following. SCIRI, Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, main Shiite group opposed to Saddam, close ties to Iran. Iraqi, an American dog. This is an Iraqi quote then. An American dog is better than Saddam and his gang. They're walking over my heart. I feel like they're crushing my heart. Baghdad is a heart of Arab culture, and they want to wipe out our culture, absolutely. So someone who's thinking that right after we invade, and then ISIS comes along, who do you think they're going to support, us or ISIS, who says, well, we're fundamentalists, but we'll offer you protection and we'll offer you a cultural identity. Dish Dasha, a long Arab road. Little detail, probably important if you're writing. Yarmouk, Western Baghdad neighborhood of proud professionals, palm trees and red bougainvillea. And the same word is in Spanish, because I think one of my characters was going to be Spanish. M249, squad machine gun. Sign of suspicion is an absence of children. If the children aren't playing in the street, something's about to go down. The same thing as what I said about the little fish when you're spearfishing. Suspect the American soldiers were having sex with school teachers in schools. I don't know where I got that from. I'm going to have to reread these books if I'm ever going to do something with this. How was the CPA established? What was their mission? These are questions to myself. While you're reading something, sometimes if I'm not sure about something, if I want to clarify more, you start a dialogue with yourself. How was the CPA established? What was their mission? Did Bremer report to Rummy? Prez? They did not consult commanders in the field. Make the case that they were there to destabilize. In counterinsurgency, military action must be judged by its political effectiveness. Hand-con. Cooperation ensured through goodwill and symbolized by handshake. Hand-con is cooperation ensured through goodwill, symbolized by handshake. Not sure what that means. What was the objective of the CPA? Loot Iraq, government money. So this is something I'm not sure about myself. Sometimes when I make a statement, from what I know of reading my notes over the last 10, 15 years, like the question mark's like, not sure about this, look into it. Were we there to loot Iraq or the government money? Military is the brawn, but they have the morals. Me having been in the military, I know that the whole system's not corrupt. You have a couple assholes, might not have been for me, but overall, um, you're not paid as much as independent contractors. If you want to make money, you go do that. So overall, I think the military is a moral force and a moral institution. Well, otherwise, why would you put your life on the line? I mean, you do it for your brothers, really. When all the stories of combat are about, you really fight for each other. But what's unifying everyone is a sense of identity that is an underlying sense of ethics. I mean, that's why I joined too. You just you think it's the right thing to do. So I said the military is the brawn. They also have morals. So I'm saying that they're not going to be all, as dirty as the politicians. You need professional thieves for phase 4. You need large-scale public sector jobs program, like the New Deal. So I'm looking at what we could have done better. Have soldiers over there when Katrina happens. You have the same government handling that disaster, handling Iraq. No wonder. They are vampires, not humanitarians. So now I'm fleshing out the theme of the story. Is that the overall theme, I think, was going to be about this myth of this predatory creature which goes around sucking blood, and then we were going to relate it to the whole macro structure of society, about a government which over here preys upon natural disasters to push their shock doctrine agenda, which Naomi Klein talked about, or over there as well. But this is like the predatory form of human nature, that we can just, it's in the vampires as an individual, and on the large social scale, that's what the basis for these wars are our worst instincts as humans, cannibalizing each other. Clausewitz, some famous military leader, the most far-reaching act of judgment that the statesman must have to make is to establish the kind of war on which they are embarking, neither mistaking it for nor trying to turn it into something that it's alien to its nature. Let me try that again. The most far-reaching act of judgment that the statesman must have to make is to establish the kind of war on which they are embarking, neither mistaking it for nor trying to turn it into something that is alien to its nature. So, honesty. The first act of judgment of a statesman when he's waging war, not talking about whether war is moral or not, just how to wage effective war like Sun Tzu would, is self-honesty, self-awareness, which I find with intelligence in general, self-awareness. That's why I said you have to be sincere, you have to be honest. Sincerity alone won't get it done, and maybe honesty alone gets it done. Maybe honesty and sincerity are close enough to be synonyms. Make point that the failure to strategize, have a commander lament about the above in an amoral way. Yeah, that's why I said, not to say that the war is good or the war is bad, but the commander just will recognize, and that's what I find in this book, is people whose job it is to study, research, and execute warfare were recognizing that we weren't doing it in the way that it's historically practiced or they're taught, which should tell you that something's up, the con is on. Make point that the failure to strategize the future of occupation was intentional. If war is business, you want an open-ended contract with no expense limit, not a surgical precision. The purposeful bumbling of war fits into the greed model. It does not fit into the at face value model of intentions. Basically, I'm trying to identify the morale hazard. That if Cheney used to work for a private contractor who's making a lot of money in Iraq, Halliburton, and we all know how about politicians leave the corporation, or politicians go back to the corporations. I think he still had stock with them even. There's this really good video I can't find on the internet anymore because the internet's starting to be closed as the rest of the society, but they actually listed all of the war profiteers, all the people in the Bush administration who had ties to the defense industry and private contractors. So they want open-ended contracts, obviously. And they want a return on their investment, and their careers are investments of those companies by placing these politicians in power. Make the point that the failure to strategize, I already said that, killing dogs in the street, just a little detail to throw in there. Dismounts, a dismounted soldier, an infantryman, as reference to from a tank gunner, friendly fire reference. IBAS, Individual Body Armor Systems. History, the British control of Iraq, an uprising in 1920. With that type of history, should we have invaded? Western, isn't that interesting when Bush says we should invade Iraq? Wouldn't a responsible leader give us some sort of historical context about those 4 questions? Who are we? What are we trying to do? What's our objective? And what are our resources to achieve that objective? Let's see. Western Baghdad's heavily Ba'athist Mansur district. Possible locations for the story. 3 basic challenges to insurgency. Arming, financing, recruiting. The U.S., our actions helped with all 3. Large dumps of weapons, the size of small cities. People in America and are given narratives because we're too busy, with our dicks in our hands, with our pop culture and shit, don't realize the size of the bumbling of the Iraq war. We see the money on the dollar bills, but if we actually laid out step by step what we did wrong, it's mind-blowing. It's the biggest crime of our generation. Which is why it's so frustrating when Obama got elected. He said we're not looking backwards. That's not looking backwards. In order to move forward, we have to move through this problem. It's absconding your responsibility. It's not looking backwards to begin to unravel the largest criminal enterprise undertaken since I've been born as a part of this nation, the largest raid on our public treasury and the largest destabilization of the region and possibly the world. That's not looking backwards. Our future peace, security, hope, and wealth of a nation depends upon solving that problem. So by avoiding that, by claiming that was in the past, when it's still ongoing and it's still dragging us down, I don't see how Obama could have proceeded with anything else, or how he would, I don't see anything that was in the way of him being an effective politician and having any sort of meaningful legacy. And that quote right there, that we're not looking backwards, we're not going to prosecute the war criminals, was pretty damning on his character and his intentions. The idea of boots on the ground, have a presence, tactical human intelligence teams, HUMINT. Apparently, intelligence industry likes to add anything to int. Yeah, like COMINT, HUMINT. MI, sending interpreters in support to buy chickens and soft drinks. So tactical human intelligence. We send people out to shake hands, kiss babies. People, isn't that interesting? Maybe I would have been that. If I had stayed in the military and taken Arabic, which they gave me, being part Mexican, part Arabic, somewhat Jewish, but a little bit brown skin, grow a good beard. So they gave me Arabic, by whatever, because I signed up on the form, but obviously, I didn't look Chinese, and Arabic and Chinese are the 2 hardest languages. So, yeah, I might have been doing that. I might have been doing something in Iraq. It would have been an interest, and that's what got me doing this project in the first place at the beginning of the year, or about a year ago, last November, December of 2017. I was like, there's so many paths I could have gone on. There's so many different little lives I could have led. So I'm starting to analyze them, and what if I had? And that's why I feel like a personal responsibility to explore this for others who did go down that path that I was signed up on, and I just keep taking a left, keep poking my head in the door and then poking it back out. I just got out of the real estate door, but I was in there for a while. People do what they know instead of finding what needs to get done. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Cordon and sweep operations where they detained whole villages, thousands of Iraqis, not enough interrogators. That's what an Arabic linguist would have been. Cordon and sweep operations, they detain whole villages. You can get the strategy right and the tactics wrong. Eventually you'll get the tactics right. But if the strategy is wrong, you're fucked. And that's why I talk about values so much, because these tech companies, where I feel about corporations, top-down culture, is if your principles are right, your strategy is right, what you feel is the heart of the issue is right, you can iterate until you find the right tactics, because if you're wrong, you'll course correct. But if your strategy is wrong, you don't have the ability to course correct. And now you're just bumbling in the dark. What's even worse is you have the wrong strategy, but you have effective tactics. And so you think you're actually proceeding, but you're proceeding towards the wrong aim. 3 towns over summer hit Fallujah and Chaldea. Anthony Shadid, the mud gets wetter. That's just a saying, Arabic saying. August 4th, 2003, Abu Ghraib reopened, waving the bloody shirt. Have a literal imagery in Iraq. Something happens and the new Louis takes a bloody rag while he talks, waving it at his men. Nick doesn't respond well to this, so they take his firing pin. So now here I'm trying to set up the fictional context on how my cousin got into that situation that I've heard. I haven't really talked to him about it. When I hang out with him, we play guitar, or we sit and we chill. We try not to talk to veterans about their experience unless they offer it. So all I know is what's been passed down from family members through brief conversations. But I was going to use it as an obligation I have to my family member, try to understand where he's coming from and try to, I'm sure other people, no one suffers alone in this world. Other people have had devastating experiences over there as well, I'm sure. Casualties are mounting, and we need to start gathering info to help protect our fellow soldiers from any further attacks. The gloves are off. These are direct quotes. They pressure the interrogators and everyone in general to treat the Iraqis as non-human. You accomplish this by mentioning casualties, your own fellow soldiers. That's waving the bloody shirt to get people to be more emotional and be more animalistic and less human, which, as we just read, is exactly the opposite of what we've learned you want to do with guerrilla warfare. Like most people who fight for their band of brothers, they experience casualties, and those above use that pain to manipulate them further. This is an authoritarian tactic. The military is a system of dehumanization and manipulation. Maybe this is my opinion. The argument is that someone has to be able to kill to protect us. But the military is set up to turn people into not just killers, but disciplined killers that follow leadership rather than their own human instinct, compassion. This is accomplished through straw man arguments. Show this. Nick and other soldiers are constantly being bombarded with these messages for your country, for your family, for your brothers, for a paycheck, because they hate you, because they can't manage themselves, because they deserve it, because it's your job. Run the whole range of excuses and let them wither away, exposing the real reason. Because it's profitable. Because this is the way we run the world. Because you can choose to be the shepherd or the sheep. We are the owners. This is my guess at the existential dialogue going on inside a soldier's head. Me not being in combat, I would have to, out of respect, run this past actual soldiers who've served. I'm humble enough to, I could have my opinions reading and peek my head into the military, but if I was actually going to, and that's probably why I shelved this book, I didn't have the time or space to do the appropriate research needed to give it the respect it deserves. Because it's not, when you write fiction about other people suffering, I feel like you should include the victim's voice as much as possible. I might have the ability to put the narrative on it, which is my gift, but out of respect for them, I never want to be someone who just borrows other people's narratives to profit from them. I think that's disrespectful. So I would give, I have some really close friends, Cav Scouts who served, went door to door, carried the heavy 50 cal machine gun, went and looked for the enemy, and then were supposed to engage in them. So they did the serious, heavy, sticky shit, and I would run it past them and ask them if this feels real. Not if it's good or bad, because we're not trying to moralize. We're just trying to, I feel like good fiction, good art tells real stories. It doesn't tell you what to think. If you capture the reality, then we can all learn from the reality. And sometimes two different people walk away from a movie with completely different views. But if it was real, it was real, and that's how life is. We could both watch a car accident and have completely different opinions about what went down, but reality just happened in front of us. And this is the car accident of our generation. Straw man is a device to manipulate, and also the husk of man left after he loses his faith. So I was really big on straw man here. I think I had a project I wanted to call straw man. So I'm using it all as a rhetorical device, but then also as a metaphor for losing your innocence. Recommended techniques from 3rd Armored Cav Regiment, operating in western Iraq. Open-handed facial slaps from distance of no more than 2 feet. Backhanded blows to midsection from distance of 18 inches or less. Fear of dogs and snakes works nice. Close-fisted strikes. Low voltage electrocution. This should be a minimum baseline. Have a memo of a guy typing this. This really happened. These are real people, real techniques that are documented. And we see the pictures on the news, and then the next day we're talking about Kim Kardashian's ass again. Whereas this is the evolution of the ugliness. This is how the stuff eventually got to the news before we forgot it again. This is going to take another shape. We have to remember who we are. There's no way to justify letting go of our standards, our humanity. This is the lieutenant, so I was going to have a moral lieutenant in my story trying to stand up for what they believe is like their ideals of what the military should be and could be. Which you have a lot of commanders, a lot of soldiers doing that. When all this was going on, you had people standing up and saying, no, this isn't how you win the war. Casualties are a part of war. So my fictional lieutenant was going to take issue with the waving the bloody shirt. And also, the people I know who served over there told me like stories about their good lieutenants and their good chains of command. So I have a couple images in my head of some people who were like, who are good leaders that I would like. That's, you take a little bit of that anecdote. Nothing's really invented. Usually good fiction, I think a lot of it's just pieced together from stuff you've observed or heard. Casualties are a part of war, period. If you cannot take casualties, you cannot engage in a war. We are American soldiers, heirs of a long tradition of staying on the high ground. We need to stay there. I think that's a direct quote. He gives eloquent speeches, this is my fictional lieutenant, that win the heart of the troops, while the other commander goes around like Iago. Iago is from The Merchant of Venice. He's like a malicious character in the literary tradition, one of the meanest, most malicious, most silver-tongued, like duplicitous characters that Shakespeare wrote. Laying the seeds, so Iago type character, laying the seeds of discontent and waiting for his moment. There are two forces at play, foils for dramatic tension, the Louis and another. He lays down his premise with bloody shirt logic. My job is to make sure these boys are killers and get them home. War is hell, and angels don't pass through hell. So I'm sure that's the opinion of many people who are over there. Show how this guy also gets orders from above. The commander above is in his camp, not the Louis. So yeah, this guy, the Louis, is going to be the outcast. And then in my fictional story, the more realistic person just talking about safety and let's just get our boys home is going to be the commander and then also the chain of command above him. Which again, when you're not in a war zone, we could document it, we could talk about it, we could fictionalize it, we could try to reclaim human values. But it's when you're in a fight or flight situation and people are trying to stay alive, it's really hard to judge from the outside. So I try to, no matter what your opinion is of the war zone, try to also be a little bit objective about people just trying to stay alive and don't judge them too harshly. Don't even judge them at all. You can't judge people who go through combat. What we're doing is we're talking about values, what it means to be a human being and to be an American. But when you're in combat, you're in combat. If I was there, I don't know how I would have acted. And that's also why when I brought up my cousin to my friend who was a Cav Scout, he was like, he's a dipshit. He had no sympathy for my cousin because he said, he endangered his fellow soldiers and we would have done the same thing. And it's like, my friend is telling me that he would have also fucked with my cousin to the point that it drove him pretty much mental. I don't know what situations they've been through, and if not before fortune, a lot of us could do things we would not agree with from the outside, but when you're in that situation and your survival instincts kick in, you do what you have to do to survive. So I get it. That is Louis' fatal mistake, that he believes that those above share his principles and are not straw men. So that's what I was going to set up the Louis as, like this, like a guy who gets sacrificed, I think, who's going to be too idealistic, and it leads him to commit a fatal error. When something happens to Louis, the forces have no counterbalance. Nick, so this is plotting, I think. Nick tries to speak up and gets punished with the firing pin incident, which comes from the personal history. Clearly lay out the premise, beliefs of these characters and tie into the overall premise. To lose your faith is to lose your humanity. So a lot of my early works, I noticed not over constructed, but I had enough there to go on. I guess I didn't have enough confidence in accurately depicting a soldier's life. I think I tried it once, a false start, and I didn't like the way it was sounding. I needed to talk to more soldiers, and I was afraid that it would come off as disingenuous, and also life got in the way, and I did a lot of other shit. But the plotting, it sounds really intriguing. This sounds like an interesting story if I'd furthered it. Maybe later on in my life I'll actually go in and I'll have the time and money to research and do justice to this. But it was an interesting concept. I think I'll probably like throw away the vampire part. The vampire part was just because it was 2008, Twilight came out. The Louis, he's a Christian. Psalms 24, 3-8. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who shall stand in his holy place? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart. This is Louis' faith, his humanity. This attracts Nick in a weird way. He reminds him of his mother. So Louis was going to be a Christian, Nick was going to be a Christian. I think Nick was a stand-in for me, and I was going to try to put myself in my cousin's shoes from what I heard of the family. Rapidly exploit internees for actionable intelligence. That's for Abu Ghraib. First 18 months of occupation, 30 to 40,000 Iraqis detained. The colonel with 3rd Armored Cav Regiment. We had really bad guys to put in Abu Ghraib. There was no room. So they reopened it up, and then immediately it was filled up too much. Purposeful in order to create insurgency. You flood the jails. So this is the cynical part of me saying this is all on purpose. The purpose of prison changes from housing criminals to creating them. Becomes criminogenic. Something I felt for a while in America. I haven't felt, that's just the statistics, is that our prisons create crime, they don't deter criminals. And so for-profit prisons is just a part of that self-reinforcing cycle. A lot of things, we have a self-reinforcing opioid epidemic. The only reason why it's slowing down now is because we're reaching the saturation point. The whole approach to Iraq war was criminogenic. It's the oldest con in the book, the protectionist racket. You don't want our protection. You don't want our protection? Well, what about after we fuck up your country? Show this character there's no option for Iraqi self-determination. And that's the most damning when I say my opinion about the Iraq war and our interests and motivations and then what actually happened. I think that's the most damning part is that if we showed any interest in Iraqi self-determination, that would undermine my point, but we didn't. At every point, we stopped their self-determination for our own interests, which means that we need a justification to stay there, because then if they pointed that out and said, well, we want to go our own way and we want to determine our own course, well, if it's a little bit more violent, a little bit more unstable, now we can justify our presence. Which, those early years of us being in Iraq, a lot of it was justifying our presence, them trying to tell us to get out, and we had to justify our presence some more. And then ISIS, coincidentally, is the biggest justification of our presence in that region, which came under the Obama administration. And then what's interesting is when Trump says that Obama created ISIS, and everyone says he's an idiot or he's crazy, well, they only let the clowns speak the truth. And so every now and then when Trump, when Jeb tries to defend his brother, and Trump is like, we got attacked on your brother's watch. Another honest statement. So Trump says, 90%, 99% bullshit, but also the court jester, the clown, back in the days of aristocracy and the courts, was the only person allowed to speak to the king the truth, because the king would kill anyone else, right? But the jester, within so much buffoonery and lies and blah blah blah, can wrap a little bit of truth and try to get out the words that in a social circle you can't just have 100% bullshit, and so it's almost like it's cathartic, and that goes back to my idea that most of our elections since the invasion, the people who won have been anti-war. But they just don't follow through with that rhetoric. They're using it as a tool just to win, and then they just, like any other political promise, just walk back on it. At Talil, there were 11,000 people, hundreds of millions of dollars spent. Not a goddamn thing done for people downtown. This is just pure, there's so much money just wasted in Iraq that was just stolen. There are documentaries on it. If you're a patriot and if you care about the public treasury and you care about democracy, that's the if war will end when it stops being profitable. And so if we want to end war, and if you're and I know the majority of the world would like to see less armed conflicts, it's just common sense. War is downright inefficient and just destroys families, cultures. Our American infrastructure has fallen apart, and all that money could have been there, put in there, and then so these contractors for the war, they're just embezzling tons and tons of money. We built showers, mess halls, coffee bars, satellite TV, internet cafes, etc. Have a reporter constantly give excuses. We are not sending the right messages to Iraqis. We look like an occupying power. This is the mentality of our culture, of America. There is no objective truth, only appearances. In the land of PR and spin, where our culture is predicated on a sales pitch and our politics are thinly veiled self-deceptions, we don't know right from wrong. We are strawmen, not human. So the reporter is concerned with us appearing as an occupying power instead of debating objecting to the fact that we are an occupying power. And this is a distinction I noticed, is that a lot of times you find people saying what we appear to be and we need to appear more this and that, where that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we need to be able to PR campaign. I'm saying what we actually are and what we actually aren't, because I feel like when we go down that road, talking about appearances, then we buy into this cult of cynicism, where nothing's really true anyways, but we just need to get up the biggest appearance. And that's where you go into like the hollow brands, hollow corporations, hollow politicians. Obama. So he cares so much about appearances that instead of committing more troops to achieve his geostrategic objectives, he just greenlit the disposition matrix, which is a system of drones flying over the world, killing people at will without any sort of judicial, arbitration or oversight. It's basically America saying that we can be the judge, jury, and executioner, which you want to talk about walking away from our morals or our moral high ground. That's pretty much the end of the road. When we say that we can target anyone in the world and identify them for assassination openly with an army of flying robots, between that and the Matrix is just a level of technological sophistication. But that's the principles, the framework. Robots flying around the world to kill targets that are determined in secret and no one has no accountability. That scene was in the Matrix. They land on the spaceship, they tear over the spaceship, they try to kill the guys. That's what a drone is. It's a robot flying around the world looking for someone to kill. That's crazy. So the reporter's concerned with appearances, we are an occupying power, proves the old adage right about you repeat a lie long enough it becomes a truth. The facts can be right in front of him. The reporter will still rationalize and deny the truth. We are not the good guys. So what they're saying is that we're the good guys, we just don't appear good. We have to appear good. And that's what I hear a lot when I read the news. I read very few people who try to back out all the way to the objective opinion, which is something I would define as something that withstands the historic record. Like, what can we say now that will actually look objective 100 years from now? Like a definitive statement on what this actually looks like in the context of world history of applying context to it. But when you take the assumption that just America is good by the virtue of definition, then you've thrown objectivity out the window. And that's where I go into like patriotism being sort of like a religion and stuff. The facts can be right in front of him, the reporter, blah, blah, blah. He is an emotional, reasoning, not logical, not human. Show this doublethink, this disconnect from humanity. So even back then, I'm thinking about emotions, I'm thinking about rationality versus emotions. And right now I'm reading a book on authoritarianism, which is talking a lot about this, tying together a lot of dots. I just found it this morning. I'll tell that. These videos are also documenting my life as it is right now. The Authoritarians by... The Authoritarians by Bob Altemeyer, Associate Professor, Department of Psychology, University of Manitoba, Winnipeg, Canada, published 2006. It's free to download off of his website as a PDF. The Authoritarians by Bob Altemeyer. And it's very relevant. He also has something on his website about the Trump administration, how it falls into the same pattern. So it's a lot about this stuff. I noticed a lot of similarities I was onto back then. And this is interesting. This is written a year after that book was published. I think it was on my radar. Now I'm slowing down to do the things that I didn't have the time to do earlier, the intellectual heavy lifting. These videos alone are going to be 30, 40 hours maybe. So, but I ain't got shit else to do right now because I stopped working for other people, that is. Rocket-propelled grenades trail blue-gray smoke while guarding weapons amnesty collection point. 120 degrees, one rocket lodged in the leg of a corporal. Another soldier pulls it out with his bare hands. One hit a specialist resting in a bus, 20 years old. Everyone is in complete shock. The guys are crying. The specialist killed in the bus was one of the best soldiers in the platoon, hit everyone hard. The lieutenant did not eat or sleep for 6 or 7 days. He blamed himself. Before it was like a video game. Now every angle is analyzed. Voice inside that senses, or there's a voice inside that senses when something's not right. And this is how people switch to that super, super heightened sense when you have a loss like that. My friend, who was a Cav Scout, said that he had a mortar land bounce off the truck next to him and it didn't explode. And he picked it up in his hand. But yeah, he was standing there and a mortar was shot at their position, bounced off the truck next to him. And he just looked at it, because that's your death right there. It's like, huh, well that didn't happen, but it could have happened. And I don't even know if I remember that story right, but that's insane. That's that I could see how that would change someone. Response to road ambush. Flank and kill the enemy with armored vehicles. I'm gonna do like 4 videos of this, each an hour long. The good news is the schools reopening, hospitals opening, health clinics, lowest cholera rate in a decade, but we caused all the suffering in the first place with the sanctions and then the war. So the good news is that we're starting to undo some of the damage from the sanctions. But this is what started, I think, to lead me to believe that the sanctions were just to soften them up for an eventual invasion. Because remember, Saddam, like Gaddafi in Libya, was giving his population a high standard of living, or else he wouldn't have been able to stay in power for so long. So they had universal health care. They had, I think, one of the highest education rates of the Arab world. They had the engineers and the people who could have rebuilt Iraq if we gave them the contracts instead of getting them to our private contractors we brought in, because like any corruption racket, you have to pay to play. And so you had to have a lot of these vested interest guys go in there feeling like they're going to get a piece of the pie. And that's what war is. It's pretty, it's like we're barbarians, basically. I'm like, I like to think ideologically I'm the good barbarian in the sense that I'm not aligned with these violent empire patterns. But the Viking barbarians, the ones who define their barbarism through claiming the pejorative of like, yeah, we kill, we rape, we pillage. How is this not that? We go in there and there was a way to go in there if we were what we claimed to be a liberating force, and then hire the people on the ground and not put all those military-aged males out of work and start rebuilding the country with their people. We didn't do that. We rebuilt their country with foreigners and our private contractors. So if you look at that Michael Moore movie, when they have that shot, Fahrenheit 9/11, where you have that shot where the guy's like, it's going to be terrible for the people of Iraq, but great for business. There's not a more honest statement about the war. If you look back on it, it's exactly what it was. How hard is it to go and find out who profited from the war in Iraq? How hard is it to find the paper trail? That's the thing about making money, is it's documented. How hard is it to find the people who profited and start holding them accountable? Good analogy the lieutenant brings up. Military is a trained pit bull that fights. The dog isn't bad, he's just trained to kill. So I think this is me trying to figure out, because I don't want to demonize the military. I have, like I said, I have a close personal attachment to the military. So how do we discuss this without alienating the people that I feel are being taken advantage of? So I guess this is an attempt at that through the metaphor of a trained pit bull that fights, but he's not bad. Because I know a lot of people who've rescued pit bulls. I had a blue-nosed pit for a little bit that my friend found from me, and I think she rescued it from a fighting family. Or like a family in Puerto Rico that was raising it to fight. So she claims that she found it just in the street, but I think she grabbed it from someone. But pit bulls are amazing dogs, Staffordshire Terriers. But if they also have certain characteristics which make them really good at fighting, doesn't mean that they're inherently violent themselves. Some would say that this is amusing and moral. Others would say that the dog is the victim. But none would blame the dog for doing what it was trained to do. Blame the master and the trainer. Don't blame the dog. And those killer dogs with the right home can become the most lovable dogs. This is the lieutenant explaining to the soldier about retaining your humanity in war. They ask, "Why then did someone like you join the military?" He replies, "I can't deny that I am a fighting dog. My father was a devil dog like his dad before him. I fight to eat, and because that's all I know. But someday I'll find myself a home where I won't have to fight, where I can learn a new way to live. And I swear to God I will never raise devil dogs of my own. I might not be able to change myself, but I can end this warring tradition, take it to the grave." So this is the internal conflict that the lieutenant has. He's coming from a military family. He feels that warring spirit in him. And I guess you could even develop it even more. He actually enjoys maybe the darker sides of war, but he's made the decision in himself to not pass it on to the future generation. Show this conflict in the lieutenant to honor family tradition, and he's a good tactical commander. But he also is working so hard to retain his humanity and those around him. You know, that's also, my dad tried to volunteer for the Vietnam War. It was towards the end of the war. They wouldn't accept him because he's epileptic. But I can't say that me signing up wasn't also because my grandfather, I actually was going to go to the Marines, but that Army recruiter got to me first. Recruiters can be very persuasive, especially if he was a wrestling badass at my high school. I was a captain of the wrestling team at the time. He was giving me sambo videos and grappling videos about Russian joint manipulation, and he was he fought underground fights in Germany. He was a cool dude. I wasn't drinking, smoking, partying like I'm sure a lot of people are with older role models, but he was definitely a role model of sorts for me, just if not for a physical manifestation of manhood. But my original instinct was to go to the Marines. My grandpa was a Marine. And you just feel you look to your generation. What did my folks do, my grandparents? My dad played guitar. Nick complains about not having the warring tradition, not having the strong male role model growing up. He mentions that his cousin, a construction worker, bouncer, epitome of maleness, tried to tell him not to join. Said that if you're not a man going into the military, you won't be one coming out. And that's something my cousin actually said to me. Because I said, everyone tried to talk me out of it. "Why are you going to the military? Why are you going in?" I was like, whatever. Again, 2000, thought we were the end of armed conflicts around the world, and it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. And so this is pretty much on my own experience. My cousin had worked in LA as a bouncer for I think Eddie Murphy or someone, but he had worked for Arsenio Hall. He was a pretty big guy, over 6 foot. He tried out for the LA Rams. He's he did Alaskan fishing. And so I was telling him, I'm trying to be a man, I'm going to the military. And he just looked me dead in the eyes. He's like, "If you're not a man going in the Army, you're not going to be one coming out." And I was like, sometimes people say shit to you that you just kind of have to eat it. Be like, all right, that's a pretty good line. Lieutenant said that the macho fighting history is a curse, and Nick is lucky and to hold on to his humanity. So now I have two men who these two characters were going to be Nick was going to be the guy who's really picked on, taken advantage of. I think the lieutenant, I'll send him up to eventually do something which was idealistic but not smart. If he was a little bit more cynical, a little bit more realist, he probably wouldn't have lost his life. I think that was going to set off the company, and without the lieutenant to protect him, they're going to take their anger out on Nick and his softness. I think that's where I was going with the plotting. But until we get to there, Nick and the lieutenant were going to start developing this really close relationship where Nick's looking towards him for manhood and advice and stuff, and the lieutenant's trying to correct him on this toxic masculinity that the lieutenant actually feels is a curse in his life that he's trying to escape. So they're both trying to be each other, really, in a way, which as I describe it, it sounds like a really beautiful story to flesh out. It might come out in other forms. This is why when you write, keep all your scraps. I was told that at an early age in college in college. Just, that's your treasure trove of it. All these little scraps, what I'm reading right now, some of it I'm doing because of the military, and I think we should have this discussion about the Iraq War, which I don't hear anywhere. mature discussion about the Iraq War from the beginning and the inception to now, and how we bumblefucked our way to now. That allows for inclusion of the soldier stories of people who are observing it, who are tangentially involved with the military, like myself, and then the layman who has no idea what's going on there. And so when people say just support our troops, they don't want to be an asshole. So you're like, yeah, every soldier's a hero and support our troops. Here's my yellow ribbon. I'm going to put my hand over my heart at the basketball game or at the baseball game or the football game when they play those troop presentations, which the military pays for in order to increase their enlistments. But we need deeper discussions, not just long form podcasts. We need deep form podcasts. We need discussions that are deep enough to include more aspects of our humanity, because I feel like that's why Thousand Oaks, we just had a shooting yesterday. That was a soldier. It was a veteran. I think it was reported. Is anyone in the news talking about what his possible motives were, or what did he do in the military? It blows my mind. I'm getting myself worked up. This is I don't get that emotional. I try not to be, but that's me. When I rant, I guess my emotions come out in my rants. Where was I? Cousin, Lieutenant says that macho fighting history is a curse. Nick is lucky, and hold on to his humanity. The lieutenant will fight for both of them, if need be. Set up Nick's vulnerability when the lieutenant leaves. ORHA, Office of Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance, later turned into the CPA, Coalition Provisional Authority. Criticism was no clear strategy, very little detailed plan, poor communication, high personnel turnover, lots of young and inexperienced political appointees, ideologically minded Republicans. Sounds a lot like Trump, right? No well-established business processes, the definition of cronyism, since we are pillagers. Tour of duty, initially 3 months. We have to clip the pattern. We can't just focus on the fruits. We have to actually start chopping out the tree. And Trump is just a fruit of this pattern of cronyism and the corruption of our political system. I mean, that's why I've come to the point where we have to have a new party. We just need a new seed, and we need to start watering it and growing it. But these trees are rotting. In 2006, we had I think it was 2006, a democratically elected Congress, and nothing happened. That's what the idealistic in the military, the lieutenant don't understand, that we are pillagers, not liberators. So I think that was going to be his blind spot. The lieutenant actually naively believed in the mission. There is nothing noble in our intentions other than the remnants of our humanity that show in gestures insignificant to the total damage carnage we are creating. And I'll stand by that anything we did in Iraq were just gestures that were insignificant to the total damage and carnage we were creating. Have as a smoking gun the fact that we supported the insurgency monetarily, and the evidence that death squads were operating in Iraq, the same as we did in Latin America to instigate civil war. So if we don't go back to the pattern of how we colonized the world, and go back to the Republican administrations going into Latin America, instigating civil wars in Honduras, which now we have a caravan of people coming up from Honduras claiming that they're refugees. But we've instigated civil wars in their country just a generation ago. 2-3 generations ago, we overthrew the country blatantly for United Fruit Company. That's a part of the historic record. And then Hillary Clinton supported the coup over there, and she is on record saying that she helped put in our guy after the coup. So this is not a left-right issue. This is institutional politicians serving their corporate paymasters in order to instill their agenda around the world. Isn't it interesting that Trump uses that truth in the term globalist in order to... It's interesting how much of what I would consider the subjective narrative I'm trying to construct of the whole world that Trump borrows in order to, as a part of his propaganda rhetoric. And again, yeah, these rants is where I get off base. Hold up a sec. Where was I at? We are the pillagers, tour of duty, initially 3 months. Yeah, Yeah, the lieutenant, so the people, the military family, the military, with the military tradition, he doesn't see that we are the pillagers, not the liberators, because he hasn't read